the most powerful naval force in human history, has been stopping Iranian oil tankers with a gun. Not a Harpoon anti-ship missile, not a torpedo. The 6-barrel rotary cannon mounted in the nose of a carrier-based fighter jet, a weapon designed to destroy aircraft at closing speeds above Mach 1, is what the United States Navy is using to enforce a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz in 2026. On May 6th, a single F/A-18 Super Hornet, launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln, intercepted a 333-meter Iranian tanker in the Gulf of Oman. The pilot didn't sink it. He didn't fire a warning shot across the bow. He aimed at one specific component of the ship, fired a short burst of 20-millimeter rounds into it, and the tanker stopped. That decision, what to shoot and where, is the story behind every Iranian vessel the US has interdicted in this war. And it reveals a doctrine that most of the coverage missed entirely. The MT Hosna is a large Iranian-flagged oil tanker, 333 meters long, built to carry crude oil across the Indian Ocean. On May 6th, it was traveling empty, unladen in maritime terms, heading toward an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman. U.S. Central Command had been tracking it. CENTCOM issued multiple warnings. The Hosna's crew ignored everyone. At 9 a.m. Eastern Time, a Boeing F/A-18E Super Hornet from USS Abraham Lincoln was launched to intercept the vessel. Operating in international waters, the pilot fired several rounds from the aircraft's M61A2 Vulcan rotary cannon into the tanker's rudder assembly. The ship lost steering. It was no longer heading to Iran. Hosna is no longer transiting to Iran, CENTCOM stated. The U.S. blockade against ships attempting to enter or depart Iranian ports remains in full effect. 2 days later, on May 8th, Super Hornets from both Abraham Lincoln and the USS George H.W. Bush repeated the procedure against 2 more Iranian-flagged tankers, the MT Sea-Star 3 and the MT Sevda, this time combining 20-millimeter cannon fire with precision-guided munitions. Both ships were immobilized in international waters. Neither was sunk. This marked the first confirmed use of carrier-based aircraft to directly enforce the current blockade, a significant operational threshold. 52 commercial vessels have been turned around since the U.S. blockade began on April 13th. The Hosna was where the doctrine moved from destroyer guns to jets. The Vulcan rounds didn't hit the cargo tanks. They didn't hit the hull at the waterline. The pilot targeted the rudder, the one component that, once destroyed, leaves a 333-meter vessel floating, running, and completely unable to go anywhere. That's the doctrine, and what it's protecting is bigger than any single tanker. The Strait of Hormuz handles approximately 21% of the world's seaborne oil trade. Since Iran effectively sealed it in March, after the US and Israel launched the strikes that began this war on February 28th, global oil prices have risen more than 40%. More than 1,500 vessels are currently trapped inside the Persian Gulf, with approximately 22,500 crew members aboard. The International Maritime Organization has recorded 32 shipping incidents since the conflict began. Of those 1,500 vessels, most remain trapped, because the cost of attempting the strait unescorted now exceeds the commercial value of the cargo. The blockade Iran imposed and the counter-blockade the US imposed in response have turned the world's most critical oil choke point into a standoff with no visible exit. What the F/A-18 did to the Hosna is how the United States is choosing to manage that standoff, methodically, with minimum destruction, and with a precision that the mainstream coverage of these events has almost entirely failed to explain. The question every viewer who saw the Hosna headline asked, and that no outlet answered, is, why not just sink it? It's not a simple question. And the answer reveals a doctrine that was clearly planned before the first warning was issued. The U.S. is operating under what defense analysts at Army Recognition identified as a mission kill framework. The goal is not to destroy Iranian shipping. It is to make Iranian shipping functionally useless, to immobilize vessels without triggering the environmental, legal, or diplomatic consequences of sinking them. A sunken oil tanker, even an unladen one, releases tens of thousands of liters of bunker fuel, the heavy marine diesel that powers the ship's engines, into a major international shipping lane. In a region where 5 countries share Gulf coastlines and global oil infrastructure sites within range of the debris field, a sinking creates consequences that extend far beyond the vessel itself. More practically, a disabled ship is a message. A sunk ship is an escalation. So the doctrine targets components, not hulls. And the first target is the rudder. The rudder sits at the ship's stern, directly behind the propeller. Destroy it, and the tanker can still float, still run its engine at full power. But it cannot navigate. No steering, no directional control. The ship goes nowhere useful. It does not sink. The crew is not in danger. For an oil tanker, losing the rudder is the maritime equivalent of cutting the steering column on a moving truck. The engine keeps running, but you've lost the vehicle. That is exactly what a burst from the M61A2 Vulcan delivers to a rudder assembly. The M61A2 is a 6-barrel, electrically driven Gatling-style rotary cannon chambered in 20 by 102 mm rounds, 20% lighter than its predecessor, with a maximum cyclic rate of up to 6,600 rounds per minute, more than 100 rounds per second. It was designed for air-to-air combat, brief, precise bursts at aircraft crossing at high closing speeds. In that role, a 1-second trigger pull delivers enough rounds to destroy an engine or sever a control surface. Applying it to a tanker's rudder is not improvisation. The 20mm round carries enough energy to penetrate the steel of a rudder and destroy the hydraulic actuator connecting it to the ship's steering gear. The targeting choice exploits a deliberate gap. The rudder is destroyed without the round ever reaching the hull or the cargo tanks. The May 8th engagements introduced a second point of attack. Against the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda, Super Hornets combined cannon fire with precision-guided munitions, the specific type not publicly identified by CENTCOM, targeted at the vessel's exhaust uptakes. The exhaust uptake is the vertical duct that carries combustion gases from the ship's main engine out of the hull. Destroying it forces an emergency engine shutdown. Without a functioning exhaust path, the machinery space floods with toxic gases, and the engine cannot run. The ship loses propulsion. Combined with a destroyed rudder, the tanker is completely immobilized, no steering, no forward movement, sitting in international waters waiting for a tow. Mission kill. No sinking, no fuel spill, no crew casualties. The FA-18 is one layer of what CENTCOM has assembled around the Gulf of Oman. An armed jet is never the first contact. Destroyers carry directed sound warning systems capable of transmitting voice commands over several kilometers, and CENTCOM confirmed that the Hosna received multiple warnings before the Super Hornet ever left the deck. When those warnings fail, a warship closes and issues direct radio communications. When that fails, carrier aviation intercepts. At each step, the crew has a decision. Most of the 52 vessels turned around since April 13th never required a strafing run. The Hosna's crew chose to continue despite an armed jet overhead. What happened next is now on the public record. This model was established a month earlier, but with a destroyer gun rather than a jet. On April 19th, the USS Spruance tracked the MV Tuska as it ran for Bandar Abbas. After warnings were ignored, the Spruance's Mk-45 5-inch naval gun fired at least 3 rounds into the Tuska's engine room, immobilizing it without sinking it. Marines inserted by helicopter and seized the vessel. The mission kill logic, the warning sequence, The boarding, the full architecture was there. What changed on May 6th is range. A destroyer needs to be within a few miles to use its deck gun effectively. The Abraham Lincoln's air wing can enforce the blockade across hundreds of miles of ocean. There is no approach angle in the Gulf of Oman that places a blockade runner beyond its reach, and with the USS George H.W. Bush operating alongside it, both sides of the enforcement corridor are covered simultaneously. More than 200 aircraft, 20-plus warships, layered ISR, and marine boarding detachments on standby. The Hosna's crew had one decision to make, and they made the wrong one. 3 engagements, 3 immobilized tankers, none sunk. Here's what that pattern means. What we know, in 3 confirmed engagements over 3 days, U.S. carrier aviation demonstrated that it can enforce a naval blockade against commercial shipping, with precision, at range, and without sinking a vessel or killing a crew. That combination has not existed as confirmed operational doctrine before this conflict. What this suggests: the mission kill framework was not improvised in the Gulf of Oman. Army Recognition's analysis notes that the specific targets selected, rudder, exhaust uptake, indicate deliberate pre-conflict planning. Someone calculated which components could be neutralized without generating a sinking, a fuel spill, or crew casualties that would shift the diplomatic narrative. These engagements look like the execution of a plan that was written before Operation Epic Fury began. What Iran can do about it is limited. Escorting tankers with IRGCN fast boats or coastal defense assets risks the kind of direct engagement that ends the ceasefire in a single incident. CENTCOM has already demonstrated it will strike Iranian port facilities in retaliation for attacks on U.S. warships. Not escorting them means accepting indefinite blockade enforcement. Routing tankers through the Strait of Hormuz itself, rather than the Gulf of Oman, exposes them to the same enforcement architecture on the other side, plus Iran's own minefields, which CENTCOM documented had been deployed with incomplete tracking records during the conflict's opening weeks. Based on Iran's confirmed behavior in previous confrontations, its tanker harassment campaigns between 2019 and 2021, its response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, its documented pattern of asymmetric escalation whenever it faces a capability gap it cannot bridge directly. The most likely Iranian response is not a direct challenge to this enforcement structure. It is pressure elsewhere. UAE infrastructure, Houthi operations in the Red Sea, proxy action in Iraq. The one thing it is unlikely to do is send more unladen tankers into the Gulf of Oman to test whether the ceasefire survives another week of this. What this doesn't resolve is the legal architecture underneath it. The U.S. is enforcing a blockade of Iranian ports while simultaneously claiming the ceasefire is still in effect. Secretary of State Rubio stated that Operation Epic Fury is over. Defense Secretary Hegseth confirmed the ceasefire remains in place. President Trump described the May 7th strikes on Bandar Abbas and Keshem as a love tap. China, Russia, and the EU have all flagged the legality of the blockade under international maritime law. That is a vulnerability of a different kind, one that a Vulcan burst to a rudder assembly cannot neutralize. The U.S. Navy fired a fighter jet's gun at a supertanker's steering system, not because it was the most powerful option available, because it was the only option that stopped the ship, avoided a sinking, and kept the ceasefire technically intact, all at the same time. That combination of precision and restraint at this scale is what a naval blockade doctrine looks like when it's designed by people who understand that the goal isn't destruction, it's control.